What if you could take a step back and look at the world? Explore the line between certainty and doubt. You are listening to the Illumination Hour with your host, Ellen Stallone. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Illumination Hour. It's me, Ellen. It's good to have you back this week, especially since I am going to be changing things up. And instead of doing a topical show like I usually do, where I research something for a little while and I put it together in some sort of fashion, it's very serious work. And it feels a little unpersonal at times. And this week, I wanted to try and combat that because I've been feeling very distant and not at all very personable. So I'm going to be doing a conversational style show this week instead of a topical one, mostly because I'm trying to combat this feeling that I've been getting, and I'm going to be talking about that throughout this entire show. But to begin, I guess I should explain, I've been feeling like my creativity is slowly crawling away from me, and I'm trying to reach out and grab it and pull it back and, shake it and say, what are you doing? Get back in here. I need you. And in part, I'm wondering if that feeling is because of college. And I have a very good explanation for this, which this is actually what I want to talk about the show more specifically, is the idea that college is kind of killing my creativity. I'm not going to blame it entirely on college, but maybe there's some personal problems with that as well. But college, it has a very specific format, and it's not very conducive to connecting with yourself. There's always a question that I like to ask and attempt to answer it in each one of these shows, but I acknowledge that sometimes I don't fully answer it, so there's, a bit of exploring that still needs to be done on all of our parts when it comes to answering questions that we have, and, keeping our answers up to date, making sure that they're logical and they make sense and they fit in reality. So that's why I'm saying it might not totally be college's fault, but I have some very good reasons as to why I feel that my classes are draining me of energy in a way that makes me not creative, not fun. And partially it could be because I don't have time to spend a weekend out with my friends or going to see a movie with my boyfriend. Those activities, leisurely things, are pretty limited. And when you don't have time to allow yourself to just have some free time where you can do whatever you want. It doesn't have to be serious. It can be playful. It can be enjoyable. And that's not to say that all experiences in school are not enjoyable, because a lot of them certainly are. And perhaps others that have been through college have a different experience than I do. Maybe they don't agree with me fully, and I would love to hear about that. In fact, you can email me your thoughts, comments, and questions at illuminationhour@gmail.com. I would love to have a discussion on this. If anybody has differing opinions, if anybody would like to add to something that I've said, that would be great. I'd love to have those sorts of emails come in, because I want to open this discussion up, not just to you to listen to, but also for you to be interactive with. If you would like to have a conversation with me, I would enjoy that. I do enjoy intellectual curiosity and delving deeper into subjects that are sometimes full of controversy or a bit of uncertainty. I would really appreciate any sort of interaction from my audience. But, that's your call. Anyway, I want to get back to college. College has traditionally been a place of higher education. Aspiring students go there to learn tricks of the trade, to build the foundation of their knowledge up, and essentially hone it after a series of years into something that's highly specific. So, thereby they become experts in their field. And everybody wants to be an expert because, everybody believes that they're right. And it's more than that, I know, but I always question whether there's a part of that in everything that people do as far as college goes. Just, getting the fancy degree to prove how correct they are, or, use that status to be able to say, well, I have a degree. Of course I know what I'm talking about. Although it'd be ridiculous to think that everybody that goes to college has that motivation. I'm just curious, how many people go to college are really looking forward to that? Probably a few, at least. But most people go to college to become a specialist in something that they enjoy doing because they don't want to be stuck in a career or profession that they don't like, right? So they go and learn everything they can, and they try to be the best students that they can. At least sometimes. I know some people just go to college for the fun experience with other college students that are just now getting away from their parents and their safe homes, and they're exploring the world for the first time. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just not the right reason to go to college, I don't think, because it is an educational place. And it's supposed to help you prepare for being an adult, essentially. Although I was an adult already when I entered into college, I had every skill that you would need to live a successful life on my own. I wasn't starving, I wasn't homeless. I had a debit card and a job, and I got a lot of experience out of the jobs that I had after high school, actually. Although they weren't, the most prestigious positions, it was real-world experience. I was interacting with people of every age, every background. I had all sorts of job duties and responsibilities, and, complying to those responsibilities was usually in my benefit because I kept my job and I did a good job at it. So I learned how to deal with those sorts of workplace situations and understand more what sort of expectations you have to set for yourself when you're living on your own. And I know not everybody that's at college has that experience, but I think it was extremely valuable and taught me, I would say, very close to as much as college is going to be teaching me, although in a completely separate way. It's not as if you can read a book and practice some problems online and learn how to hold a job or to pay the rent or to get a phone plan on your own. It's not going to teach you how to change a tire. It's not going to teach you what to do when your car dies, or how to keep yourself from running out of money and food and transportation, or how to be self-sufficient and solve all of these world's many problems that you must face on your own. There's a lot to be said for working in a job before you go to college, because you learn a lot not only about how the rest of society functions when you're away from home, when you're just out in the wild, essentially. You have to compete for resources with other people. You have to apply to jobs. You have to show up on time and dress nicely and perform specific functions. But there's no clear guidelines as to how to do that. That is all 100% completely self-motivated. So living out on your own teaches you essentially to be self-motivated. More importantly, it teaches you how to be your own self-advocate, because as you grow older, you start to lose your dependence on other people. You become more independent, and that's a good thing, but that also means that other people are not always looking out for your best interests, so you have to be your number one advocate. And college has given me a very different experience than that. I am, in fact, not learning how to be entirely self-motivated. First of all, when you go to class and you sit down in the room, there's this obvious power dynamic that exists between the students and the professor. You know, you can't talk while they're talking. Don't interrupt them. Also, students are usually very passive in the way that they approach the professor. They don't generally just say their questions. They wait to be called upon. And I do that too out of courtesy, but there are times when, the teacher's quiet for a long time and he's looking at the book or at the board, and there's some silence and a person has their hand raised to ask a question, and I just don't understand why people don't ask it. Like, if they're not talking, you're not interrupting them. And it doesn't even have to be that scenario. Any scenario, I feel like the teachers and the students should be closer to the same level. Students should be able to approach the professors with their questions and concerns and not be made to feel like they're lining up before a judge, which is sometimes how it feels. And professors do have an obvious power, which is to make students feel a certain way, whether it's belittled or empowered, but they also have this less noticeable power, which is to change the way that people think and the thought patterns, I guess, that are acceptable or are useful. And they can encourage ways of thinking that they choose. So it's an immensely influential thing that teachers do. And they can use that power for either good or evil. It depends on the teacher, really, though. I'm not going to put everyone into one basket here. Some are very nice. I once had a professor that didn't even grade anything like other professors. She was extremely lenient. If people showed up late, she understood. If a person's paper was turned in 2 weeks late, that was all right as long as they got it done. The only content that she really graded was the grammatical aspect of it. It didn't matter what subject we chose, and of course this was an English teacher, so this class allowed for a lot more creativity and self-reflection. We learned all sorts of different techniques for how to express that, how to write our inner mind's workings down and put it together in a story that people can relate to much better than we did before. At least that's what the class was for. Not that everybody did that. There were a lot of students that did not accomplish anything close to the goals that they were supposed to set for themselves. So aside from that, my English professor was very kind and understanding and had a system that allowed for people to express themselves truly. But on the other side of the spectrum is a chemistry teacher that I have, and he is a very small person. He's shorter than me, and I think he has some sort of Napoleon complex because of that. But he is very judgmental when it comes to what students say in class and how they behave, and he will vocalize that, not in a good way, though. He's almost passive-aggressive when it comes to things like that. He'll look at somebody who's talking in the back row and say, "We're ready to start whenever you are, any day now." He also walks around the room like he's the king or the lord of that classroom, and you always have to answer to him for everything, and he has to stick his nose in everyone's business. And it's not a very professional thing to do, nor is it conducive to learning for the students. And I don't think that's right. I don't think that people who are in a professional setting to teach students should be treating them like they are lowly and children. And though he is very passionate and excited about this topic that he teaches, He is also very judgmental when it comes to what grades students have, and he will treat each person differently based on how well they grasp what is going on in class, which I don't think that's entirely fair either, because people who aren't understanding something need your help. They're not looking to be judged negatively by you. I suppose when you're constantly in a setting where that power dynamic exists and you do have some sort of legitimate power over people, that behavior can just proceed and grow untempered. But then there are other classes, like, for example, pre-calculus. That was probably my least favorite math class, not only because of the course content, it was just all over the place, but it was because the teachers do what they have to, which is teaching out of the curriculum. And the curriculum is fact-based completely. It's all theory and fact and practice, and it's written down on hundreds of pages. And there's all sorts of examples and terminology that you get to learn. But the curriculum only works in one direction, and that is word problems that present you with a question and then just leave it to you to answer. And that's essentially what the teacher does too, after dryly explaining what variable is what and what you do with it, what the process is. Now try it out for yourself. And I've always had this issue with math where I couldn't understand it very well unless I could connect it to something that I understood in the real world. Like, for example, physics. I feel like physics is very easy because you understand where the equations are coming from and what's happening as you go through the equation step by step. You know, what variable represents what? Well, this one is speed or velocity or distance or time. Those are all concepts that I easily understand because, you know, I've lived with them my entire life. I interact with them on a daily basis. But when it comes to concepts like molar flow, extent of reaction, these concepts and things that don't have any correlation to things beyond what they are. I mean, it's easy to make diagrams and illustrations, which is what I'm hoping is going to happen, but it's not easy to understand these things at first glance. There's 20 different K variables in chemistry. K is used 20 times over with different subscripts to represent, you know, all of these different things with completely different units of moles or time or liter or heat energy, constants of all sorts. But there's so many other letters in the alphabet. See, it's just simple things like that that get me. Why couldn't they use other letters? There's plenty others to choose from. You don't need to use K every single time. But that's just convention. That's how the curriculum was set up. You know, wavering from that at all could cause some confusion. I am understanding of that. I know the teachers are just teaching out of the curriculum, which is probably the same thing that they've been teaching for the past 10 years. So, to them, it becomes easier and easier to understand. And I think they, at some point, lose touch with the fact that students are learning this for the first time and don't understand it so intuitively as they do. And I feel like this suggestion is evidenced by the way that class is taught. We do examples out of the book, straight out of the book, but there's no discussion beyond that. You know, there's no connection to anything in the real world. It's like, well, if you want me to understand the concept of molar flow rate, then perhaps you should depict it somehow. We should do some sort of mental experiment and talk about in detail all of the different aspects of what's going on. Let's not just brush over the general definition of something. Let's get into the finer points of it and connect it with things that are already part of our knowledge base, things that we do understand. I want to be able to play a mental movie about the subject that I'm learning, and really understand it and connect it to things in the world around me. That would just make it real. It would make it more intuitive and a lot easier and faster for me to remember and understand. For teachers to do that, they would have to take a lot longer teaching classes, and most teachers don't have that period of time. You know, they have a set number of hours for their class. For some it's 1, for some it's 3, but they have more than enough content to fill that time as it is. You know, if they were to spend extra time explaining these concepts in detail, they might not have enough time to fit their classes into the scheduled time, and they would end up losing money in the end because some colleges claim to be student-oriented. They're really more about the money, just making money. They're a business. And it's pretty obvious when you look at schools that are like $40,000 a year to go to, there is no reasonable explanation for why. It is so goddamn expensive. Are they spending that much on upkeep of the campus every year? Are they paying their professors an insane amount of money? Maybe. I don't understand why at the community college that I'm going to, I'm taking 3 classes, and those 3 classes cost less than the 1 class that I'm taking at the University of New Hampshire, which is a really big university. And 1 class for 1 hour 3 times a week is more expensive than 3 of my other classes, which are extremely long, combined. It's like this endless money pit. Where's all the money going anyway? It's just unreal, especially with the situation that colleges have gotten themselves into with student loans. It's really dire, and I hope I'm not stuck in college when the student loan bubble bursts, because I don't think that anybody would be able to afford to go to college anymore. I don't think there would be many colleges around after that. So my point, going off on that tangent, my point was that if classes were more student-oriented, I think that the teachers would spend more time relating to the students and understanding their needs and their questions. So even though they could be teaching out of a curriculum that's completely dry, fact-based, they could still make it interactive and fun. They could still, try and explain it in a way that is enjoyable to listen to. Because I think most people that I've run into in smaller classes that are more challenging, they're there because they love the subject, because they're fascinated by it. They really want to grow in a certain area, so they are self-motivated to be there. And for people like that, it's not necessary to have a lot of extra time spent explaining the minutiae, because they will try to learn it on their own. And I do this myself. If I don't understand something, I sit down with the book and I practice and I read it, and I go back and reread, and I try to understand things. Usually I have to go online and watch a couple videos or hear somebody else explain it in a different way, and then I can begin to understand it. My knowledge based on that subject can strengthen beyond that. But it takes a lot longer. I go through more frustration, and it's not as efficient, or it's not as clear. I don't think learning subjects is wasting time, but I don't like the idea of losing that much time being frustrated not understanding something when I could have just spoken with somebody who did understand it better than me and learned about it 10 times faster. And like I said, maybe this is my problem. Maybe I should just spend more time getting tutoring. But again, it's difficult to find that time, being at a place where you can be tutored at the time that the tutor is there. But you see what I'm saying? If professors were to change their teaching model to something more intuitive, then it would be more enjoyable to go to class and to listen to the lecture, and not only listen, but participate in it. Some classes do involve this a lot more than others. The English class that I talked about earlier, that was very student interactive. Actually, as people wrote papers, we would pass them around and have each other proofread them and give our commentary, and it was quite fun. I read so many interesting papers and so many horrible papers. I learned a lot about my own writing techniques and how I handled the critique of other people. A few months back, I took an ethics class, and that was extremely enjoyable to me because I got to go to a class and talk about some of my favorite things to talk about, which are ideas in philosophy and in ways of living life and seeing the world. You know, you can look at the same situation from 3 different viewpoints, but which one is more right or more acceptable? In that ethics class, we would explore ideas such as, what is moral? What is ethical? Is it okay to torture someone if they're keeping secrets that might end up killing someone? Or what would you do if there was an emergency? If someone was drowning, would you stop to save them, or would you just walk by like you hadn't seen? Would it be different if you were in a rush? I thought it was a very fun challenge because sometimes in class, conversations would pop up where one person would be defending their point against somebody else's argument. In fact, that's what most of the assignments in ethics class were about. Choosing a set of ideas and explaining them fully and defending your position when faced with certain predicaments. There's a lot of interesting questions to consider, a lot of ethical dilemmas presented to you like that, and I just enjoyed the mental sword fighting, if you will, that happened in that class. It was a learning experience every time. I always left that class feeling invigorated and knowing that I could explain my position in a reasonable way. It added to my self-confidence. In ethics class and in English class, it's not as if you have a problem, here are the variables, here's the solution. There is no right answer, and the variables are too numerous to even count. In essence, classes like that are on the opposite side of the spectrum from science and math, although there is some overlap. Every mathematical equation does have a story. It has an explanation and a history. Every chemical reaction also has an interesting history. In fact, most of the chemical reactions that we take for granted today were made by accident while people were trying to figure out how to create gold from horse dung. You know, it's amazing to me how many techniques have been developed to manipulate their surroundings, to play with fundamental elements. These discoveries happened sometimes hundreds of years ago, before they even understood what was happening, but still they could create a reaction. In fact, the most famous one, which I heard get brought up in multiple classes on a regular basis, is the Haber-Bosch process, which was developed in the early 20th century by 2 German chemists, Fritz Haber and Karl Bosch. In this reaction, they took nitrogen gas and hydrogen gas and combined it to make ammonia, which revolutionized the farming industry 100 years ago. To me, even hearing the background, having something to relate that chemical process to, I suddenly could not forget it. It's as if it was ingrained in my mind. It's so much easier to remember when you have something else that you can relate it to, that you can relate to other things, because all of our brains have this need to build a web or a portrait, and every time we learn something new, we pin that new piece of information onto an area that is very similar to it. And then we can create connections to other subjects, like, farming. When I think of farming, I think of crops, like corn and tomatoes. And when I hear Haber-Bosch, I think about ammonia and elements from the air, because nitrogen and hydrogen are very plentiful in the air. All you have to do is pressurize them and purify them. And then voila, you get fixed nitrogen that is able to fertilize as many plants as you need. But you see, it's more enjoyable when I can think about these other aspects of the Haber-Bosch process and not just hydrogen plus nitrogen yields ammonia. I think that's where the dry, boring part comes in, because there's nothing more boring than just hearing definitions. Even if we don't recognize it consciously, just hearing a definition by itself doesn't make it very memorable. You have to connect it with some other thing. Unfortunately, although I love learning about math and science, as I get higher and higher into the levels of difficulty, I'm finding that there's fewer creative descriptions. There's fewer connections created. It's mostly all definitions of things and pointing them out and saying, this is what this is, now figure out how it connects with this other thing. Here's the equation. Here's the rate law and the rate constant you need to figure out on your own. Here, I'll do one example. Now you do the rest. And this is why I say I feel like I'm losing my ability to have fun. I'm losing my creativity. The teachers don't have time for me. I don't have time for my friends. I'm losing personal connection. Sometimes it's difficult for me to be creative and draw connections between two unrelated things. It's hard for me to draw correlations most of the time when I'm working on classwork, just because it's all very narrowly defined. If there were wider definitions or explanations that just contained more detail, or the teacher spent more time explaining it and having conversations with the students about it, it would be not only more understandable, but more of a positive feeling as we continued on through the learning process. It always feels so reassuringly positive when you feel that you're starting to understand something or grasp something that you didn't before. But I would really love to figure out some sort of way in which the school system, or even just me in my personal life, if I could try to infuse joy into the numbers and into the facts and definitions. Most of the time I feel like those don't mix. They're like oil and water, fun and math. And I know it doesn't have to be so. I've had fun doing math before. It's very exciting when you're figuring out how far can you drive before the police car catches up to you. It's related rates in calculus. Or how do you balance masses, such as you would have to do when you're making chocolates if you want to convert fluid ounces to cups. And trust me, it's a lot more fun when you do it out on paper as opposed to just looking it up on some online calculator. It makes you feel like you're capable, like you're able. So I know that there can be this positive reinforcement, this wonderful self-esteem boost that comes out of enjoying your learning when it comes to understanding the world around you. But when it comes to the college system, they're very much disconnected from emotion. In fact, they often encourage that you don't show emotion at all. Don't laugh in class, that's rude. Don't ask too many questions because we don't have time. Don't discuss it with your neighbor because that is also rude. It's as if the professors want you to shut out your emotions during class. And often, because of this dichotomy of, not having the connection to the teacher or the material and being pressured with the judgment of grades, when I go in to take tests, I will often feel a lot of anxiety. Unless I know the material very well, then, if it's something that I've studied for years and there's no way I could get any questions wrong on it because it's just been, reinforced so many times, I feel pretty good about that. But going into a test on something that is new to me, even if I'm good at it, I still get very nervous. And I am not the only one, for sure. There are plenty of other students I talk to that have this pre-test or quiz anxiety. And it could be self-imposed, as in the student thinks if they don't get a good grade, then they're going to not do well in this class. And if they don't do well in this class, they might have to retake it and spend more money, or they might not get the job they want. I think a lot of that could be alleviated by the professor having a chat with the students before handing out the tests, which has happened a few times in my experience, but not very often. They're very rare occasions, but when they do happen, they're memorable because 99% of the time when you go in to take a test or a quiz, you just go to sit down and the teacher says, "All right, we ready? Here we go," and just hands it out. But I do have this one professor that had this chat with us before he handed out our first exam. And he talked about how when he was in college, he went through this exam in front of a panel of 5 professors, and they asked him all sorts of math questions, and he had to write them down on the whiteboard behind him. They would ask him to explain things, and he would have to do that to the best of his abilities. He went through 4 2-hour tests like that in front of a panel. So 8 hours of testing in one day, basically on a stage. That sounded fucking scary. And yet, I am so amazed at this man's ability to have his wits about him that way, because a lot of people would have their emotions interfere in a situation like that. They would become too anxious, and they wouldn't be able to focus on solving the problem. That professor basically told us in one story, not only was he a badass, but also we don't need to worry because what we're about to do is pretty easy compared to that. And, just having that brief conversation really relaxed me. It made me feel good about the test. It made me want to get it over with. I really appreciated the teacher's attempt to make us feel more comfortable. He was trying to share a personal experience with us. I think that was comforting to me, because I felt in that moment that no matter what happened on the exam, whether I did poorly or did really well, that it was all going to be okay for me. I wasn't going to have to go in front of a panel and explain all of my mistakes. I was just going to get what I got, and he would still view me as a person and not just a failure. Maybe I do need to learn how to handle my emotions better, and I am attempting to do that. Quite recently, I've picked up this practice of doing short meditations before I go into class, especially on days when there's quizzes or tests. I'll just sit in a quiet area, close my eyes, and listen to a woman telling me that the present moment asks nothing from me, and that I am enough. And although it sounds a little silly and maybe hippy-dippy or something, it really works when you're doing a well-made meditation. It's very soothing to your emotions, and it makes you reflect on what you're actually doing with your life, how big the world around you is, how trivial this issue, this emotional disturbance, is going to seem even a few days from then. So, on the one hand, I think that there is a value in controlling your emotions when it comes to, math and science or any subject really that stresses you out. But on the other hand, I think there could be more emotional investment when it comes to math or science curriculum. There's really nothing that's relatable as far as emotion or experience or even visualizations go in curriculum. And they could certainly add that in. I mean, I think it would be a major improvement. And the book companies usually rearrange their books and then reprint them every year or two to make more money. So why wouldn't they just put in the extra effort to add in these extra little fun things that will help the students understand things better or connect with them more on a personal level, integrate them into their daily life, help them to reflect on it. Because reflection is really where most of our learning comes from. I have been voicing my disappointments about how emotion doesn't really tie in with these subjects of math and science, but on some level they do. I mean, if you're in a math or science program, you're in it because you want to be. There's something about that subject that you love learning, And for me, I see math and science as wonderful subjects because you get to learn about the nature of the world. You get to figure out and define all of the rules that govern our existence. How things change temperature or how things move, what forces are interacting. Why does this chemical work but this one doesn't? Why does pouring soap on a grease stain get rid of it but running it underwater doesn't? Simple things like that. Once you learn them, you begin to appreciate the world more because you understand the simplicity that's inherent in these rules, but also the complexity of variables and the variety that can be found everywhere you look. I want to have more enjoyable moments like that in my life. I want to make every moment an enjoyable one. Everywhere I go, I want to find something to appreciate. And the more you learn about the world around you, the more you appreciate it. You can relate to it more. That's what I want out of my education. I want to refine my knowledge enough to where I can explain or understand just about anything. The more I learn about this world, the more I want to keep on learning. That applies to just about every aspect of my life except for politics. The more I learn about that, the less I want to know. I would like to call for some sort of change in the way that teachers teach and students learn. And I know that me saying this isn't probably going to change much in the real world, but it's something that I hope to see accomplished in my lifetime, or someday. Teaching really does need to undergo an evolution so that everybody can understand the world better and get more joy out of their life. Let me clarify, I am not saying that I think there needs to be a government intervention or a rewriting of programs that currently exist in a legal way. What I'm saying is that I think teachers should be more empathetic. They should be more attuned to the needs of the students and try to put themselves in the shoes of the students so that way when they're teaching they have a better understanding of what it is that they're explaining and how they should explain it so that it's easily relatable for the students. So I'm not saying that we need more government funding or anything like that. I can hear the argument coming from a mile away that, well, I chose to put myself in this government institution. What do I expect? I should just stay away from anything that has anything to do with government. Which, for most of my life, I do, and I completely agree. But what do you do when you're somebody who has higher aspirations like me, who wants to get an education in something that you can't learn at a trade school? There is no other alternative besides getting a college degree. So, although I might be putting myself through this experience, which is in a big way affected by government decisions, I also think that it could be different, and the way that things are now, the way that things have been conventionally, is not the best way. All I'm saying is that I think there needs to be a change in the way that people think about what teachers do and how they can be better at it. And perhaps they can even teach students in a way to be their own teachers. And that's all I have to say about that subject. I really strongly believe that there is a way to enjoy every learning experience. And I want the people who are supposed to be delivering that learning experience to do a better job. Perhaps something also that could help me would be to pick up more creativity on my own time, which I could certainly try, but as I mentioned, my time's limited. After I do this show, I usually don't have that much time for myself, so I'm going to try and metamorphosize the show into my creative time and not just subject-oriented. Although, obviously, I still need subjects to hone in on and talk about, but I'm going to try and have more fun in the future with the show. And hopefully it turns out to be a positive change, not only for you listeners, but also for me. So before I go, I just want to share this one little story with you. Last night I went to a gala. It was a dinner at my college, and it was honoring business leaders and people who had donated to the college, and they had invited some successful, outstanding students to go to this dinner as well. So here I was at this amazing dinner that was kind of exclusive, and they had the gym decorated in drapes and these beautiful flower centerpieces with underwater LED lights. Amazing food. They served this pumpkin ravioli that it was so delicious. And they also served free wine, which I was amazed at. It was a really generous, wonderful occasion, and all of my professors were there, including professors from previous classes that I'd had. And I spoke with my English professor and my ethics professor, both, at the same time. I started explaining to them, in brief, what I've been telling to you, is that I've been feeling my creativity stifled by my math and science classes because they're so dry and boring. In all honesty, I am reflecting on this moment and feeling regret. Because when I listen to myself say those words, that my classes in math and science are boring and they're dry and you probably don't want to hear about them, I wonder if I was saying that because I've just been conditioning myself to think that way. I've heard it so many times from other people that science and math is boring and they don't understand it or they don't care. So I just try to glaze over it for most people. But that's not really how I feel about it. In fact, what I think about science and math is that it's fun and it's experimental. It branches out in every direction. You can never get bored or run out of things to talk about because there's so many subjects and so much detail. It just doesn't involve the free-thinking activities that English and ethics do. And I wasn't sure if they would understand it, but I should be trying to convey my love of these subjects to other people. Because that's how I feel about it. I don't think it's boring. I think the way that it's taught is, for sure. But once you learn about how you can set up a recycling system for a different mixture of chemicals, knowing that you can do that makes you feel this ability to not only explain your ideas to other people, but also to work with things in the real world that you can actually touch and deal with. Unlike soft sciences like sociology that just deal with interpersonal relationships and how people think, which is certainly not solid or mathematical in any way. You know, it's not like you can build a structure out of that sort of material. So maybe the change should start with me. Instead of me telling people that it's dry and boring and they don't want to hear about it or care, maybe I should just express to them how much I love it and how much I want to continue enjoying my educational experience and trying to encourage the teachers to be more interactive, to explain things in a way that I understand, so that way I can share my love and knowledge with everyone else. So with that, I think I'm going to wrap up the show here. You can email me at illuminationhour@gmail.com. Thanks so much for listening, everyone. See you next week. Hi, everyone. I hope you're still listening because I have a clip planned for you to listen to, and it's from the author John Taylor Gatto, and he's very famous for writing books such as Dumbing Us Down, The Hidden Curriculum of Compulsory Schooling, and The Underground History of American Education, a school teacher's intimate investigation into the problem of modern schooling. Know that you can take John Taylor Gatto's advice and thoughts with a degree of seriousness because he was a school teacher for nearly 30 years. And he has some very insightful opinions as to what is going on with school and perhaps why these issues exist. I hope you enjoy the clip and let me know if you have any thoughts about it.
School was intended on this continent to be, as it had been in northern Germany, a fifth column into the burgeoning libertarian condition where disenfranchised and oppressed groups were clamoring for some kind of seat at the bargaining table. School was to be a surgical incision into which the class-based management theories of England were to be inserted to interdict the liberty traditions. England's multi-layered social class is simply a modern-day representation of Julius Caesar's advice that when you're overwhelmed by the enemy, you divide them and conquer them that way by setting them against each other. The method was to be by infiltration into the minds of children, out of sight of their parents. The well-read here won't be shocked. Theorists from Plato to Rousseau to Frederick of Prussia knew and taught explicitly that if children could be kept childish beyond its term in nature, if they could be cloistered in a society of children without any real responsibility except obedience, if their inner lives could be attenuated by removing the insights of history, literature, philosophy, economics, religion, if the imminence of death and the certainty of pain and loss can be removed from daily consciousness, if the profound reflections on one's own death could be replaced with the trivializing emotions of greed, envy, jealousy, and fear, young people would grow older, but they would never grow up, and a great enduring problem of supervision would be solved. For who can argue against the truth that childish and childlike people are far easier to manage than critically trained, self-reliant ones? And now you're ready to hear the 6 purposes of modern schooling taken directly from Dr. Inglis's book. The first function of schooling is adjustive. Schools are to establish fixed habits of reaction to authority. That's fixed habits of reaction. Notice that this precludes critical judgment completely. Notice, too, that requiring obedience to stupid orders is a much better test of function 1 than following sensible orders ever could be. You don't know whether people are reflexively obedient unless they'll march right off the cliff. Second is the diagnostic function. School is to determine each student's proper social role, logging the evidence mathematically and anecdotally on cumulative records. You probably thought that the kid or parents or neighbors or the region, circumstances. No, school is to determine your proper social role, and they're to fix you in that role mathematically on their cumulative records. Next comes the sorting function. School sorts children by training individuals only so far as their likely destination in the social machine, not one step beyond. Keep in mind, you're not listening to John Gatto. You're listening to the man for whom the honor lecture in education at Harvard is named. The fourth function is conformity. As much as possible, kids are to be made alike. whatever the background they come from, they're to be made alike. This is not done from any passion for egalitarian ideals, but so that their future behavior will be mathematically predictable in service to market research and government research. Next comes the hygienic function. This one's my favorite. This has nothing to do with individual health, but it has a lot to do with the health of the race, at least as Inglis or Darwin or his first cousin Galton saw it. Hygiene is a polite way of saying that school is expected to accelerate natural selection by tagging the unfit so clearly. That's what all those little humiliations from first grade on, that's what all the posted list of ranked grades are about, so clearly that the unfit will drop from the reproduction sweepstakes, either in despair or because their likely mates will have accepted the school's judgment of them as terminally inferior. And last comes a fancy Latin word, the propedeutic function. That's a fancy word meaning that a small fraction of lucky kids will quietly be taught how to take over management of this continuing project. Guardians of a population deliberately dumbed down and rendered childlike in order that government and economic life can be managed with a minimum of hassle. It's that low-down, nitty-gritty, common purpose, not Marx's grand warfare between classes and greedy captains of industry. It's simply so that management will have a minimum of hassles.
And instead of doing a topical show like I usually do, where I research something for a little while and I put it together in some sort of fashion, it's very serious work. And it feels a little unpersonal at times. And this week, I wanted to try and combat that because I've been feeling very distant and not at all very personable. So I'm going to be doing a conversational style show this week instead of a topical one, mostly because I'm trying to combat this feeling that I've been getting, and I'm going to be talking about that throughout this entire show. But to begin, I guess I should explain, I've been feeling like my creativity is slowly crawling away from me, and I'm trying to reach out and grab it and pull it back and, shake it and say, "What are you doing? Get back in here. I need you." And so that's why I'm saying it might not totally be college's fault, but I have some very good reasons as to why I feel that my classes are draining me of energy in a way that makes me not creative, not fun. And partially it could be because I don't have time to spend a weekend out with my friends or going to see a movie with my boyfriend. Those activities, leisurely things, are pretty limited. And when you don't have time to allow yourself to, just have some free time where you can do whatever you want, it doesn't have to be serious. It can be playful. It can be enjoyable. And that's not to say that all experiences in school are not enjoyable, because a lot of them certainly are. And perhaps others that have been through college have a different experience than I do. Maybe they don't agree with me fully, and I would love to hear about that. In fact, you can email me your thoughts, comments, and questions at illuminationhour@gmail.com. I would love to have a discussion on this. If anybody has differing opinions, if anybody would like to add to something that I've said, that would be great. I'd love to have those sorts of emails come in, because I want to open this discussion up, not just to you to listen to, but also for you to be interactive with. If you would like to have a conversation with me, I would enjoy that. I do enjoy intellectual curiosity and delving deeper into subjects that are sometimes full of controversy or a bit of uncertainty. I would really appreciate any sort of interaction from my audience. But, that's your call. Anyway, I want to get back to college. College has traditionally been a place of higher education. Aspiring students go there to learn tricks of the trade, to build the foundation of their knowledge up and essentially hone it after. In part, I'm wondering if that feeling is because of college. And I have a very good explanation for this, which this is actually what I want to talk about the show more specifically, is the idea that college is kind of killing my creativity. I'm not going to blame it entirely on college, but maybe there's some personal problems with that as well. But college, it has a very specific format, and it's not very conducive to connecting with yourself. There's always a question that I like to ask and attempt to answer it in each one of these shows, but I acknowledge that sometimes I don't fully answer it, so there's, a bit of exploring that still needs to be done on all of our parts when it comes to answering questions that we have, and, keeping our answers up to date, making sure that they're logical and they make sense and they fit in reality. What if you could take a step back and look at the world? Explore the line between certainty and doubt. You are listening to the Illumination Hour with your host, Ellen Stallone. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Illumination Hour. It's me, Ellen. It's good to have you back this week, especially since I am going to be changing things up.